Oh my God, I did not mean to swing swing the microphone that hard and fast. Ayo, we're leaving that in. Who cares? Ooh, that's nice. How's it going, everyone? I apologize in advance. Before we start this video, I just want to say I am sick, recovering from being sick, which is why I haven't posted in a week. So I'm going to be taking my time with this one. I'm going to sound stuffy. My voice is a little bit deeper than normal. So just work with me here. I appreciate you for being here. With that being said, hello people of the internet and welcome. My name is Daniel K. Hargrove, also known as Daniel the DM, and today I just wanted to have a quick discussion about Dungeons and Dragons. I've been spending too much time talking about Daggerheart this, Daggerheart that. What about D&D, Daniel? Gosh dog it. Your name is Daniel the DM on your social media. Why don't you talk about some Dungeons and Dragons? I understand. I hear your cries. I hear your outcries. Not a single person's commented for this. It is what it is. But I do want to talk about the current state of Dungeons & Dragons, because while I was recovering from being sick, I ended up seeing a post, I think it was on Threads or Blue Sky, and the post was asking, where do you see D&D in 5 years? Is it still the top dog of the TTRPG space, or has it been overthrown by something else? And that gave me a little bit of a laugh. So I was like, overthrown by what? What are we talking about here? It made me think of the comparison that I always make, which is that Dungeons and Dragons is the Call of Duty of the tabletop space, right? And also in the same vein as there's no COD killer that's going to be coming to dethrone Call of Duty, the same way there's not going to be in the next 5 years a tabletop system that comes in and overthrows Dungeons and Dragons in whatever way, shape, or form. Because what you have to understand when we have these conversations about Dungeons and Dragons, we're also having a conversation about cultural cachet, right? And the reason I think that comparing D&D to Call of Duty is such an apt comparison is because both of them are synonymous with the genres and the industries that they are a part of, right? There are certain people who look at Call of Duty and think that is all that gaming has to offer, or that's all they engage with from the gaming space, because it is the most popular thing, right? And we can see that in the sales statistics, right, of Call of Duty every single year being the best selling game that year, I believe, besides times like when a Grand Theft Auto game comes out, right? So every single time without fail, Call of Duty comes out and it's top of the pack. It's bringing in that casual audience. It's bringing in newer players into gaming and all that sort of stuff, because they think it is the most easily accessible game to get into because of how vast the community is and how culturally synonymous Call of Duty is with gaming. And the same thing happens with Dungeons and Dragons, because this is a game that's been going on since the 70s, right? So within the TTRPG space, there are some people who think TTRPGs are just Dungeons and Dragons. They think it's just D&D, that's it. That's really the extent of what the space has to offer when it comes to the variety of the games. It is the most popular. It is the one that is the gateway to getting people into the hobby. Hey, that's what it was for me, right? I've enjoyed Call of Duty. I've enjoyed D&D. Both of them have been a gateway in some way, shape, or form into gaming in and of itself, right? For their, respective spaces. So these games are juggernauts, regardless of who owns them, right? Regardless of the company that owns them, right? And there's a lot of criticism of both of the companies, right? Of the companies that own Dungeons and Dragons, the companies that own Call of Duty. And I think also, as someone who has been a connoisseur of both series, I think what you end up seeing as well also is this conflict of, there are some incredibly talented people who work at both of those companies who often seem like their decisions are at odds with the higher ups and the people who are trying to make the big boku bucks, right? The big money bags, the C-suites, if you will. And it always seems like the decisions that are made by leadership are always contradictory to the community first driven new message that these corporations are trying to get across, these developers are trying to get across in order to keep people as a part of this space. But let's wrap this around back to the initial question, right? Where do we see it in 5 years? And to be frank, I don't see any changes in the industry. I don't see a world where Dungeons and Dragons still isn't the most played, most engaged with game, most, actual plays, most exposure game in the space. I don't see a world where that doesn't happen in 5 years. And that's regardless of what's happening with the parent company, right? Because again, Dungeons and Dragons is synonymous with the genre in and of itself. I'm a part of the D&D TikTok community, that's where I truly got my start. So every single week now, it feels like more and more there are people who are making videos that are going viral, like, hey, I've never played D&D before. I want to find players who've played it. I want to find a community of Black players who've played it. I want to find a safe space for other people who've played it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's reaching this wide net of audiences that want to get into this hobby and are looking for community within that space. And you're seeing that happen more and more online, and it's really interesting to watch. And I don't think that's going to change. However, I think one of the most interesting things that you're seeing happening is the mindset shift, the cultural shift within the TTRPG space to be more welcoming and accepting and pushing people in a more inviting way to try different systems. And all of this stems from the OGL situation, which I don't want to go into too much detail about it. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I'm not particular as much as criticism as I've had of how Wizards of the Coast handled that situation during that time. I also have a just as heavy of negative critique of content creators who were operating to that time and were just on some diabolical levels of just mishandling information, spreading misinformation, being clickbait artists, all that sort of stuff. I think that's just from my little bit of journalism experience that just really that sort of stuff gets underneath my skin. To see like misreporting, misrepresentation of situations, all that sort of stuff, reviews. So despite all of the mess that surrounded the OGL situation, the important thing to understand is that event is like that Nexus event, right? Or I don't know, or maybe canon event, right? If we want to talk, Spider-Verse sort of thing, where we were on a timeline with D&D and then everything branches off from that point, right? Everything completely branches off once the OGL situation happens. And we are now on this timeline where that was like a spark for so many different people to say, enough is enough. I want to start my own system. I don't want to be reliant on this company. I don't want to, in order for my content, in order for the games that I play to have any form or modicum of success within this space, I want to make what I want to make. All right. So we've seen that with Dungeon Coach. We've seen that with Cold Ball Press. We've seen that with now at Matt Koval, right? With Draw Steel coming out. We've seen that with Daggerheart, right? All these things are happening and the space has been shifting. And also during that time, you had so many people, so many D&D dedicated channels being like, this is my first time trying Pathfinder. This is my first time playing Call of Cthulhu. Here's a bunch of other systems you could try if you've never tried any other systems before. Here's Kids on Bikes. Here's this, here's that. And that moment is, even though it's gone by, and a lot of the people who rallied against, D&D are now, partnering with Dungeons and Dragons, partnering with Wizards of the Coast again, making sure all their content gets uploaded onto D&D Beyond as a network and as a service. However, I feel like that spirit never really died of people wanting to branch out, right? I think you still have the same limitations that are there between players who are comfortable and don't want to change systems, between people who just don't have the time, like they hardly have enough time to play, let alone find the time to be able to try different systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless of that, I think within this space, you've seen a shift towards wanting to embrace and try out different things. And I think this space has been clamoring for, I don't think necessarily like a D&D killer or something to overthrow Dungeons and Dragons, but something in this space as an alternative that can bring people into the hobby. in a similar vein that can act as a magnet to get people coming into this space. And that's the thing. Those games have already out there and those games have already existed. There have been plenty of games out there that are alternatives to Dungeons and Dragons that are easier to learn, easier to pick up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Might not have all the accessibility bells and whistles that D&D Beyond has, but those games are out there. The communities might not be as big, but the games are out there and always have been. But now the mindset has shifted overall towards wanting to be more inclined into trying out different things. And I think there's a want for other things to succeed. I think that's what a lot of people saw with Daggerheart, and I think that's what we kind of saw with some of the backlash for people who saw the Campaign 4 announcement and were disappointed that Daggerheart wasn't going to be the system, because I think people want more of a stand from content creators, from corporations in this space, from performers in this space, from the figures in this space, to champion and push and create things that aren't just Dungeons and Dragons centered and branches out from that regard. So it's interesting to see where this space is at currently with D&D, and it's a bit all over the place. Again, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of incredibly talented people who are there, but also they're losing people left and right over at Wizards of the Coast, you know, with whether it's layoffs, firing, people leaving like Chris Perkins and all that sort of stuff. I'm incredibly excited to see what Mackenzie DeArmas is going to be doing as, you know, taking up even more of a leadership position. I think they're incredibly talented, but you know, it's a frustrating situation. I think when you look at the overall landscape, and I believe they initially, recently had commentary where they said, you know, they're trying to work on community feedback and building back up that trust within the community. And it's a very difficult thing because those are things that have been said time and time again ever since the OGL situation. But constantly there's been like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back with certain things. Where it's like, oh, this is going forward, and then they pull back on Project Sigil. They go forward with this, then they pull back with, well, actually, you can't purchase individual items in the shop. It's a whole bunch of step forward, step back, and don't even get me started about the overall looming threat of generative AI within a company in a space that is supposed to be promoting a product that is about the power of your imagination. And the fun that comes from sitting around at a table with your friends and using your own imagination. Like, don't get me started on that, right? So it feels like this like invisible doomsday clock is like kind of overlooming D&D, despite the fact that no matter what happens with the corporation that surrounds it, the game is still going to continue to live on, and it's still going to be popular. People are still going to be making supplements for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what you're going to see in the content is a lean towards nostalgia. That's why they're going back to Dark Sun. As many opinions as I have about Dark Sun and the part of the community that gets active when Dark Sun content is mentioned or created. I think, you know, to bring that comparison back into Call of Duty, you know, that's what you're seeing. It's going back to Modern Warfare. It's going back to Black Ops. We're going back to Dark Sun. Might go back to Planescape. We might go back to this. We might go back to that. That nostalgia is one hell of a drug, and they're going to run that dry and before they fully commit to trying some form of innovation with 6th edition, right? So it's an odd place. It's an odd place for Dungeons and Dragons right now to be in. And I have like so many conflicting opinions about where it's at, the decisions that the company that have control over the IP are making. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to just look back at. And I have an emotional attachment to this game because I wouldn't be in this space if it wasn't for D&D. I have completely put off playing a whole bunch of other tabletop games, but watching Critical Role and then learning the game through the osmosis of watching all of season 2 and then going in and playing D&D at a New Year's Eve party in 2021, that was it. That's where I caught the bug, you know? And I've since then been on this incredible journey of playing a whole bunch of different games, from Call of Cthulhu to Alice is Missing to Daggerheart. I've played Eat the Reich. That's an incredibly fun game. Very apt for the times that we live in. So I've played such a wealth of games, and I'm so excited for what this space has to offer and the type of stories that I can tell inside of it. But it also is a shame because, there is so much also good that could be done with Dungeons & Dragons as an IP, with it being the largest game in the space, what it can do for bringing in more people into the hobby in general, being more inclusive and getting people from all walks of life to come in and play and genuinely try to fit in with that motto of D&D is for everyone, right? And actually meaning that. In creating those spaces in that regard, I think is incredibly interesting in the potential that it does have. And they were set up for the easiest slam dunk in the world between Critical Role and Stranger Things is happening at the same time and all this sort of stuff. But again, everything from that OGL moment onwards, everything became hyper scrutinized, hyper analyzed. There wasn't problems prior. Let's get that straight. It's not there wasn't problems prior to all that sort of stuff. But I think once you have such a massive PR nightmare such as that, the magnifying glass on every single little indiscretion becomes amplified, right? Well, what do you think? Dear viewer, dear person listening to the sounds of my sultry, sickly voice. What do you think about the current state of Dungeons & Dragons? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you indifferent? Are you still playing? Are you trying to switch? Are you just like, look, it is what it is. I just play the game for free, but I don't support Wizards of the Coast with any of my purchases or any of my money or my time. What say you in the comment sections down below? And also, do you have mixed feelings as well? You're like, man, I don't like some of the decisions that have been made, but I love the game. What's going on? What's going through your mind? Let me know. I would love to know other people's thoughts about the current state of Dungeons & Dragons, and not in like this sense of like this rage bait, clickbait sort of like, I want to get you guys angry. We need to see, like, I just, what's going on? What's going on? It's weird, right? It's weird out here. Everybody else feels like it's weird. It feels weird to me too. Because I think there needs to be space for that like awkward middle ground. Like sometimes you're not raging out. Sometimes you're not like over the moon about stuff. And like, hey, sometimes things are weird, dog. Sometimes you have a lot of mixed feelings about stuff, and that's okay. And I think we need more of an exploration of that rather than a pull towards extremes, towards an emotional state towards certain things, right? And I think that's where we can find some of the most constructive conversations to happen about what we want to see happen within this space and in the communities that we build. But with that being said, I gotta get out of here. I've got to take more cold medicine. I've got like 2 or 3 performances this week. Oh, bro. I can't. I do not like being sick, but it is what it is. We're going to get through this. With that being said, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. If you want to see more content like this, shout out to the patrons over at patreon.com/Daniel K. Hargrove. If you want to see content early or, just want to help out, help support, pay whatever you like, whatever you think content is worth, whatever you feel like you can afford. But with that being said, remember, joy is an active revolution in and of itself. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others. Peace.